As you know, the theme of this summit is prospering in the new normal. Part of the new normal that we're experiencing is the post-normalization of diplomatic relations with countries in the Persian Gulf. And our next speaker doesn't need much of an introduction. Joel Rosenberg, a very successful evangelical Christian author who's written several New York Times bestsellers. He's also the editor-in-chief of All Israel News, a fabulous news website where you can get the current events on what's happening in the Middle East. Joel is going to be giving us his unique perspective on the exciting current events that are happening in this region. Then we're going to bring in by Zoom Henrique Cymerman. Henrique himself is a journalist who's been doing shuttle diplomacy for many years between Israel and the Persian Gulf states. And today, Henrique serves as the president of the Israel Gulf States Chamber of Commerce. After Joel gives us his talk, he's going to be interviewing Henrique by Zoom. I know this is going to be exciting.
Thank you, Kalev. It's great to be here. What an honor to be at the Arise Business Summit and to be speaking to all of you all over the world. We are watching game-changing developments here in what I call the epicenter, increasingly calling it the vortex, because this is the center. The eyes of the nations are increasingly riveted on Israel and her Arab and Muslim neighbors, the epicenter of the momentous events that are shaking our world and shaping our future. I've had a unique opportunity in the last number of years as a Jew on my father's side. I'm not Jewish on my mother's side, as an evangelical by faith, as an American citizen by birth, but also now, in the last 6 years, as an Israeli citizen. I'm a dual citizen. I know that's a unique set of identities, and every single one of those identities should have prevented me from ever meeting the head of an Arab state. Instead, however, it has opened the doors for me to meet the leaders of the Arab world. And in the next few minutes, I want to take you on a whirlwind tour and give you a sense of who these leaders are that are shaping the tremendous change, the tectonic change that we are seeing here in the region. We are going from a period just a few years ago. I mean, think about the breathtaking rate and speed and depth of change. Just a few years ago, the Islamic State had built a caliphate. It was engaged in outright genocide, trying to wipe out the entire Christian community of Syria and Iraq, trying to wipe out other minorities like the Yazidis, and killing more Muslims than they were killing of anybody else. That was the Islamic State, the caliphate that was built in Iraq and Syria. Meanwhile, of course, you had the Taliban, Al-Qaeda ravaging Afghanistan. You had the tremendous insurrection forces, the revolutionary forces, and the ghastly murderous forces rampaging across Iraq. You had the Arab Spring, the overthrow of American allies, most notably Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt, taken over. Egypt, 100 million people taken over by the Muslim Brotherhood, the originators in the last 100 years of radical Islamist terror theology, ideology, and practice. That was just a few years ago. And now what are we talking about? We're talking about the Abraham Accords. We're talking about Israel making historic peace treaties with not one more Arab country, but 3, and maybe more to come, probably more to come. The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and of course, just in recent days, we've seen reports that I believe are accurate that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the head of Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad, traveling what was supposed to be a secret trip but got quickly leaked to Saudi Arabia to meet with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, widely known by his initials, MBS. We have the Israeli Prime Minister on the phone regularly now with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates who are inviting him to come to Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and he is inviting them to Jerusalem. The Prime Minister of Israel on the phone, and the Israeli President, by the way, on the phone and on Zoom with the leaders of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain, inviting us to Manama and them to Jerusalem. This seemed unthinkable just a few years ago, but I want to talk about how we got there. And I also want to talk, since we're at a business summit, about the implications. Because in my view, and I'm going to front load this point, I believe that the dramatic breakthroughs that we're seeing in Arab-Israeli peacemaking are leading to what very well could be what I'm calling a Middle East gold rush. Now, there are a lot of X factors. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. Okay, I'm a Russian Jewish pessimist on my father's side. I often see the world not just as the glass is half empty, but it's cracked and it's leaking. Okay, and that's my natural state. That's one of the reasons I became a thriller writer, because I saw worst case scenarios and I would write about them. Fortunately, there's a job for being a pessimist. And you can be a thriller writer, to write about worst case scenarios that you pray never happen, but you think they could. But by my faith, my evangelical faith, I'm an optimist. Okay, those things battle within me. And when I look at the Middle East, I can easily make a case that things are dark and they're going to get darker. But that's a tough case to make right now because we're seeing so much positive change. Still, on the horizon, just over the horizon, we're seeing the rise of a very dangerous alliance. And I'll just mention it without unpacking it for right now. But we're really looking not just at the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people, but the Iranian regime and their bid for nuclear weapons, long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles, the funding of terrorist organizations, their efforts to overthrow moderate Sunni Arab regimes all throughout the region. It's not just the Iranian threat. However, it's also Iran's growing, emerging alliance with Vladimir Putin in Russia and Recep Erdogan in Turkey. Those three, and then you add in the Chinese, the North Koreans, and some others, are starting to form an anti-American, anti-Israel, anti-Western alliance, which I believe is dangerous and will become increasingly so. So you have on the one side, to the east, you have a Russian-Iranian, Turkish alliance drawing in some other critical countries. To the west, you have an American, Israeli, and growing Sunni Arab alliance. These are the two forces. These are the two fronts that, God forbid, should meet and create a clash. Right now, we're not seeing clash, but we are seeing these two alliances form because of each other. Okay? Now, into that, I got invited to start meeting with these leaders. I had written a novel, actually a series of novels several years ago, in which ISIS, the Islamic State, captures a cache of chemical weapons in Syria and then decides to attack numerous targets. One of their targets, again, fictionally in my novel series, ISIS decides they're going to assassinate King Abdullah of Jordan, blow up his palace, and take over the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan to fly the black flags of ISIS over the kingdom. And this would fundamentally change the security architecture in the region. Right? Jordan is not a country we think much about, but that's because it's stable. That's because it's peaceful. That's because it's moderate, and primarily because its leadership is moderate, is peaceful, in King Abdullah, the longest-serving Arab monarch in the region. But we don't think about him and the challenges he faces because things seem to be going well. But you knock out King Abdullah, you knock out the security of the Hashemite kingdom, ISIS takes it over or some other radical Islamist force, and suddenly you've got a very serious threat to Israeli security, to Palestinian security, to American interests and Western interests in the region. So I wrote a novel about it. And, you know, because I'm not the brightest, guy in the room, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, I made King Abdullah an actual named character. That may not have been a good idea since ISIS was trying to kill him in the book. But as it turns out, he read one of the novels. One of his advisors picked it up in an airport, read it, gave it to the king and said, "You have to read this." And the king said, "Why?" He said, "'Cause you're in it." And he said, "What are you talking about? It's a novel." "I know, but you're a named character." That, rather than me being banned from the kingdom of Jordan forever, which probably, what he should have done, he invited my wife and me to come for 5 days. And we got to spend time with him and his inner circle of advisors. And here's a Jewish, evangelical, American, Israeli, 2 sons in the Israeli army, novelist, meeting with a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad and the longest-serving Arab monarch of any kind in the region. This set into motion him asking me, Joel, would you be willing to invite evangelical leaders from the United States to come and meet with me? I'd like to expand this conversation that I'm having with you. And of course, the answer was yes, and that set into motion a delegation. Now, other doors opened that ended up with 5 meetings with King Abdullah of Jordan, 5 meetings with President El-Sisi of Egypt, 2 meetings of 2 hours in length each with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who is probably the most controversial leader in the region, but is also trying to create game-changing, dramatic, tectonic change inside what was once known as the Forbidden Kingdom, trying to bring it into the light, as it were, making mistakes, but huge vision called Vision 2030 to make that country a country of the future that would draw foreign direct investment, technology, trade, tourism. A country that was completely closed to the entire world now wants to become the tourist leader in the region. They'll have a run for their money with Israel, but who would have ever wanted to have gone to Saudi Arabia? But they are making the case that we're open for business and we're open for tourism. The United Arab Emirates, I sat for 2 hours with Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. And in that meeting, that was the fall of 2018, in that meeting, I said to him, listen, you need to know 3 things about evangelicals. Number 1, we love Israel, and we love the Jewish people. It's not political for us. It's theological. It's fundamental to who we are. So we just need you to know that we love Israel, and that's never going to change. 2, we want you to know that Jesus commands us to love our neighbors. The Palestinians are our neighbors. Arabs are our neighbors. Muslims are our neighbors. Now, we don't have an exact plan of how to do that. That's challenging, but we want you to know it's not because we love Israel, we hate the Palestinians or hate you. We don't. And we came here to get to know you. And third, we pray, because the Bible tells us to, we pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Many of us pray that every day. I certainly do. And I said, we are looking who will be the next Arab leader to make peace with Israel. At that point, we hadn't seen it happen in more than 23 years since Egypt and Jordan. And the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates leaned forward. He said, Joel, I am ready. I'm ready to make peace with Israel. We were shocked. We were stunned. And that set into motion a conversation which concluded when I had the opportunity to go to the White House on September 15th and sit on the South Lawn and watch the Prime Minister of Israel, the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and the President of the United States sign the Abraham Accords. The question now is, where does this all go? And I'm excited. I'm excited because I do believe eventually the Saudis will come on board. I believe the Omanis will come on board, the Moroccans and others. But I also want to just take a few minutes and as part of the summit and part of the interview I'm about to do, there are huge business opportunities, investment opportunities. And I just think it's exciting and it's worth taking a few moments. Imagine if oil-rich Arab countries start deciding to invest in Israeli companies, in Israeli venture capital firms, and so forth. I think this is going to be a dramatic change. Just consider some of the numbers, okay? Israel is a country of about 9.5 million people. We've got an annual gross domestic product of about $340 billion. And we are the startup nation, right? We are the country that has got all kinds of entrepreneurs creating all kinds of new technologies that need funding, that need marketing, that need markets. Okay? Now let's look at the United Arab Emirates. That's a country roughly the same size, about 10 million people. They have a larger GDP of about $420 billion. And they have sovereign wealth funds. Just consider a few of these. One of them is a $700 billion fund. Another is a $250 billion fund. Another is a $225 billion fund. Another's about $50 billion. That's just the United Arab Emirates, that has just made a peace treaty with Israel and wants to invest and wants to work together. Bahrain. Now, Bahrain is smaller. It's a country of only about 1.5 million people. It has a GDP of about $36 billion, but its sovereign wealth fund is worth close to $20 billion. Now, you could say that's small by comparison to the UAE. Okay, but they've just made their bet, not with Iran, not with the radical Islamists, not with the Muslim Brotherhood, not with Al Jazeera, but with Israel and the United States. This is exciting. Now, consider what would happen if we really do make peace with Saudi Arabia, a nation of 34 million people, an annual GDP of about $600 billion. Two of their sovereign wealth funds, and they are just getting started. One is about $500 billion. The other is $320 billion. They have the largest corporation in the world, Aramco, their state oil company, and they are now selling shares of Aramco in order to grow their sovereign wealth fund. Imagine a moment in which the Arab world stops seeing Israel as an enemy, seeing Zionism as racist, using their money and technology to stop us, to destroy us. What if the whole thing flips? And Arab wealth and ingenuity and business savvy combines with Israeli entrepreneurship and innovation. I just think it's an extraordinary moment. I would be encouraging you to be praying for peace as we continue to do that, but also continue to connect with the Arise Business Summit and others that you will see on this program to look for business opportunities and investment opportunities, not just in Israel, though as an Israeli, I want you to be involved in it, but also between Israel and the Arab world. We are in a game-changing moment, and I hope you'll be a part of it. Thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys. And now it's my pleasure to shift gears here for a moment and go into an interview with Henrique Cymerman, who is going to be a fascinating interview, and he's on the line with us now live from Tel Aviv. Henrique, it's great to be with you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, thank you. Let's get into first a little bit more about your background. You're a journalist, but you're a journalist, an Israeli journalist who has done some very interesting interviews. And I just want to get a little bit of that so people have some context for you. Aside from the introduction, you have interviewed some of the most radical Islamists in the region. Take us into your world as a reporter, and then we'll talk about your interest in the Gulf.
Okay, so look, I've been really more than 25 years a correspondent in the Middle East, and for different media outlets in Spanish, Portuguese, English, French, and also here in Hebrew to Channel 2, today Channel 12. You know, using the fact that I have foreign passports, I reach interesting places, both in the Palestinian territories, in the West Bank and in Gaza, but also in the Arab world in all these years. And I think one of the characteristics of my work was the possibility of meeting people that in a normal life I wouldn't, maybe to fight, but not really more than that.
Right.
Because I always thought we should know them. We should know what do they think and what do they want. So that's how I met, since the beginning, leaders of Hamas and of Islamic Jihad, people that could kill my family, really, in a way. But it was fascinating to meet them.
Were you ever worried that your personal life was in danger?
Well, there were some moments, yes. There were some specific moments where I think that my life was in danger, but you know, that's the job. That's being a journalist. It's not like being, you know, someone that works in a bank. I mean, you have some risks, but we try always to reduce those risks, because I say always, we are not Rambos, we are journalists. Right. So we must really try to bring the material we need, lowering as much as we can the risks.
So
but
one of those people that you interviewed was Sheikh Yassin, the spiritual head of Hamas, the terrorist group based in Gaza.
14 times.
14
the founder
times.
of Hamas, yeah. The founder of Hamas, and and a gentleman with a voice, you know, that looked like a lady voice. He could, I remember incredible things. I remember seeing him blessing people from Azadin al-Qassam, the armed arm of Hamas, the terrorists really, who went to Israel and to other places to do all kind of terror attacks. And I remember also a very, very special moment when there was an attack in a school in Herzliya where my son Yair used to study, and a girl was killed by a suicide bomber sent by Hamas. And the day after, I needed to come to see Sheikh Yassin. So there are very tough moments that I remember in my career. And, you know, sometimes I needed to forget these parts when you're working, like a doctor would do probably. But these are things that are with me for all my life.
What's
really
the biggest takeaway that you had from Sheikh Yassin specifically to try to understand who he was and what he wanted in this part of the world?
Well, he was frightening, really. I remember things he said over the years that really showed that he wouldn't accept, never would accept him and his movement, Hamas. They would never accept the state of Israel. And that was said to me many times in his house, surrounded by people who then became later leaders of Hamas, like Ismail Haniyeh, who was in a way the head of his office, if you can call it that way. It was strange because I have the feeling until today that he knew I'm Jewish. I'm not sure he knew I'm Israeli also. But he used to call me every time he wanted to speak with the foreign press, which was always also interesting. I must tell you, there is something important that happened some months before his death. He told me, for the first time, by the way, he would accept a tahadiyeh, a kind of ceasefire with Israel, never a full formal peace recognizing Israel, but yes, a kind of tactic a ceasefire for some time, for some years. He spoke about 20 years, 30 years. I think in the end of his life, he understood the strategy they adopted of sending human bombs to Israel, almost 200 human bombs if you include all the organizations. That was not the right strategy. And he was looking for something else to bring his final goal, which was, and it is yet, creating a Muslim country in all this area, including Israel, replacing the state of Israel and replacing the Palestinian Authority.
Of course, you were not only in danger from Hamas, Henrique, you were in danger from Israel, because if you were in the room, sitting, having coffee, let's say, with Sheikh Yassin, a missile could come through through the window at any moment. Did you ever consider that?
Well, we can consider all kinds of things, but I don't think so. I don't think I was in danger from Israel. My only danger was Hamas at that moment. And
because I'm thinking if I was running Mossad, I'd be watching you, and after you left the house, I would know where he was. But anyway, that's a different story for a different time. But one of the things that we are watching, Henrique, and you really have been at the vortex of this shift. The radical Islamists had been on offense for much of the last, several decades, right? We have been seeing war after war, terror attack after terror attack. And it's not that those things are over, but there are moderates rising in the region, in the Arab states, that have decided, fundamentally, that they are taking a different path. And maybe they personally weren't involved in those radical Islamist movements in the past, but they've decided they have to make a choice. Is the United States, is Europe, are the investors of the world, are the people of the world going to see their countries as enemies or as friends, as evil or as part of the good guys? And I've had this unique opportunity in a different way, but in a parallel way, I think, in some ways, to you, Henrique, of getting invited to sit down with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, the effective leader of the United Arab Emirates, with Mohammed bin Salman, two-hour meetings with the Crown Prince and presumably the future monarch of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the big kahuna in the region, right? I don't think there's any country that in the Arab world that we look to think where Saudi goes, the region goes. It used to be Egypt, but Egypt has been humbled in recent years. So we're seeing this big change because MBS, MBZ, certainly President El-Sisi, which removed the Muslim Brotherhood, the parent company, as it were, of Hamas, out of Egypt. And of course, King Abdullah, our most faithful, moderate friend and ally in the region. But we are watching these guys push back, the Bahrainis as well, push back very hard at the radicals. Talk about your angle, your perspective on this shift. It's post 9/11, it's post Iraq War, it's largely post Afghanistan, but it's also post Arab Spring, where these monarchies decided we have got to make changes, not just for America, but we might get overthrown otherwise. I'd love your angle because you have a unique perspective on this. And then we're going to talk about the business opportunities, the economic opportunities that seem to be emerging out of this.
Well, how many hours do we have?
I know, it's a fascinating, well, I'm writing a book on it right now, but you probably are too.
So you know, I was the last journalist interviewing Yitzhak Rabin 24 hours before his assassination. And I remember that interview very specifically. I remember when I asked him about the future, he spoke about the threats and about the opportunities. The threats, he said, are fundamentalist Islam and Iran. And the opportunities are the pragmatic Arab world, including the Gulf and the Maghreb, mainly Morocco. And if you listen to that interview today, you could have the feeling that it was yesterday, because it's the same exactly. I think these contacts with those countries started between Israel and them already then, 25 years ago. But I think that, as you said, in the last years, and mainly in the last decade since the Arab Spring, there is a huge change, a kind of a tsunami that is bringing a reshaping of alliances in the Middle East. I think for Israel, that's an opportunity, one of the biggest Israel had in the last 72 years since the independence. I call it the opportunity of a second independence. Not only because of the huge economic opportunities and opening of new markets to Israel, but also because politically and in the army point of view and intelligence, there are new opportunities for Israel that are happening as we speak. As we heard, for instance, as something very common, the Prime Minister of Israel visiting Neom in Saudi Arabia and meeting the Crown Prince. I asked one of the princes in Saudi Arabia in January, what happened? How come? Why in the last century, the only common thing the majority of the Arab leaders had was the fact they wanted to eliminate Israel from the map? And what happened in 2002 with the so-called Saudi proposal, peace proposal, that something changed. And suddenly some countries, really important countries, as you said, Saudi Arabia, also Egypt and Jordan, but also Morocco, and you have the Emirates and Oman and Bahrain. What happened? So he said to me, look, the first reason is because we have common enemies. And that's clear. We have Iran, and we have the Islamic groups, the radical groups like Al-Qaeda, like Daesh, the Islamic State, that want to, in a way, destroy our regimes. We are in the same trench. We are together there. Second, he said to me something amazing. Already in 1973, we understood there is no military option to defeat Israel. Because he said Israelis arrived to that war at the beginning on their knees, and after 5-6 weeks, they won. And today, he said, Israel is the strongest country between Indonesia and Gibraltar. Then he said, you are the startup nation. You succeeded to create something amazing, with all the difficulties on security, on terrorism, fighting, investing in your army. But even like this, you became one of the centers in the world of the ecosystem of startups and high tech. And we want to share with you all these technologies. And maybe something that most of the people in the West and even in Israel are not aware, the fourth reason, he said to me, is the fact that 70% of their population in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, are under 30.
Yeah.
And he said to me, they don't want to carry the baggage of war. And for them, the wars like 67, 73, 48 are like the Roman wars, something really past. And they want to go forward.
Well, this is an extraordinary development. I mean, it's unprecedented in the history of the region, unprecedented in the history of the world. Certainly I mean, you'd have to go back to Solomon and building friendships with, King Hiram of Lebanon and the Queen of Sheba, right, an Arabian monarch coming to Jerusalem to honor and build relationships and a friendship with Israel. We just haven't seen it. It's not part of our history. But what's changing now is, as you say, this perception that Israel is strong and that it's got something that the Arab world wants. We don't have oil, right? We've complained from the founding of the country. Lord, you give us the promised land, give us Saudi Arabia, give us something with oil. I mean, come on. But now, and we do have natural gas now, but we have used the lack of natural resources to build human capital. And this is where the oil-rich countries want to go now, because they realize the oil is running out and the world is shifting away from oil. And so talk to me about your new venture. It's not like you've got enough on your plate, but you've decided to do something new, which is launch the Israel Gulf Cooperation Council Chambers of Commerce. Okay, it's new, it's still getting stood up, but you see something that investors, business people, entrepreneurs around the world are only beginning to sense, which is that what I call it is a Middle East gold rush is coming. If these peace treaties continue to be built, the opportunity is not about digging into the ground and bringing up oil. It's about Arab wealth investing in Israeli technology and vice versa to change the region and change the world. Take us into first the Chamber of Commerce that you're developing, and then the opportunities that you see.
Joint ventures is the key factor. Not buying and selling only, not a bazaar, but doing things together. That's what we as Israelis are asked. Look, as I said to you, in the last 10 years, I've been really traveling a lot as a journalist, and not only as a journalist, also as a lecturer and a professor. I've been from Morocco to Iraq many, many times, and including the Gulf, mainly the Gulf countries. One of the princes in one of these countries said to me something amazing. He said, look, we have a very good relation in defense, in everything that is military, intelligence, but you can't keep alive a tree with only one root. You need other roots. You need commerce, you need industry, you need academic cooperation, you need culture. So that's how the idea of creating a Chamber of Commerce and Industry was born between Israel and the GCC countries. And in November, I presented it in Jordan, in December in the Emirates, in January with high-rank ministers close to Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. And when I came back, we just organized a group of founders, 25 people from different backgrounds, business people, professors, some journalists, some military men, some people from Mossad who know really this area. And we all together organized and we declared this Chamber of Commerce. There are some others also, but we are the only one recognized by the Israeli government. Okay. And then we started creating there in the Emirates, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and also in Bahrain, chambers that parallel to ours that will cooperate with us, with local leaders. We are in that process. I believe that in January, February, we will already have those chambers created there. There is a lot of motivation because, as you said, In a way, some people look at this relation as El Dorado. You remember that?
Yes.
The gold.
Right.
I think we must be very careful. These Israelis, of dozens of Israelis going in their planes and reaching there, trying to do everything in 2-3 days are a problem. We have a gap in time. I've been in a meeting where an Israeli said in 3 years' time, in the long range, we should reach this, this, and this. And the Emirati person answered to him, you mean in 30 years, in the short range, we should reach this, this, and this. We have a time gap. We Israelis want everything yesterday. And the first thing they want is to create a relation. They see in Israel a strategic option, a strategic choice, and they think we should think about the future. The next generation, building something which is not only economic, but has lots of economic aspects. And I believe we are in the beginning of a huge adventure in that point of view. And if we'll know how to deal with that, I think Israel is going to be reinforced in the area. By the way, this regional option is something I believe in, I think since 2010, when I first visited Dubai, and I understood that something was changing in the Middle East and that there are new options to the State of Israel.
It's amazing. As you speak through this forum to business leaders, entrepreneurs, investors all over the world, particularly evangelicals who have a deep love for Israel, and whether they're in Singapore or Hong Kong or the United States or Latin America, wherever, have built extraordinarily successful businesses, but have not thought of the Middle East as a place to invest unless you were investing in oil. Middle East, Christians and other business people around the world have seen this as the source of tremendous instability, and our love for Israel notwithstanding, okay, invest in Israel, but the Arab world, that doesn't seem to make sense. What's your message to, again, you've got a vast a range of business people and investors watching this program. What's your message to why would you recommend them getting involved in business and in investments in the Gulf with Israel at this moment? In other words, based on your last statement, do you think there's enough there yet to get moving?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is a possibility of triangles in different places in the world, including Israel and the Gulf countries. Starting with tourism, we are going to have 28 flights between Tel Aviv and Dubai every week.
That's
so imagine.
It seems optimistic, but I was with a couple just the other day. They are so excited. They're Israelis. They've never been to an Arab country. They were literally, I wouldn't say shaking, but they're super excited to visit Dubai.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is a great excitement. I travel next week for this conference. I heard all the planes are full for the next 3 weeks. So if you want to come,
I'm booked. I'm good.
Hurry, try to organize everything.
Yeah.
But I want to remind everyone that we are in the Middle East. And in the Middle East, we have some problems. We still have Hamas in Gaza. We still have Hezbollah in Lebanon. We still have Iran trying to create this kind of, I would say, half-moon state, or if you want, of territory with 200,000 men armed that want, in a way, to threat the State of Israel. I mean, problems are not over. We must understand that the spoilers are still there, and there are still some sources of instability.
Yes. No, you're right. I mean, there's real risk that has to be assessed into this process. Give me the last 15 seconds, because we are running out of time, unfortunately.
Sure. Well, I just want to say that we are living incredible times. And the opportunities, the threats are there, and we know them for many years. But I believe today we can have a new coalition with parts of the Arab world that are worried about the future and that want to write a new future. And I hope will have the knowledge and the sensitivity and will find the way to create this bridge with those countries that can change the life of the next generation in Israel.
Amen. Henrique Cymerman, thank you so much for speaking to the Arise Business Summit. And I want to thank you. We're going to continue to track this story on All Israel News and All Arab News. And maybe we need to get you to start writing for us. God bless you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, and good luck to you.